At the end of World War II, the great European powers weakened during the 6 years of war. After the occupation, Germany was divided between the Eastern and Western Allies. The eastern part fell into the hands of the Soviets, and the west fell into the hands of the United States, Britain, and France. After the end of the war, two great superpowers remained in the world, the United States and the Soviet Union, who competed with each other, and the Cold War began between them. One of the first Cold War encounters took place in Iran after World War II. When the northwestern regions of Iran were still occupied by the Soviet Red Army, the Soviet Union established two puppet governments, the Republic of Mahabad and the Republic of Azerbaijan. Fearing Soviet influence and communism in Iran and other parts of the world, the United States confronted, and then in 1946, US President Harry Truman warned the Soviet leader, Stalin, that the Soviet army must leave Iran. Otherwise, the United States would intervene militarily. As a result of these pressures, the Soviet Red Army eventually left Iran, and with the arrival of the Iranian Imperial Army in the northwest, the two Soviet puppet governments were destroyed. At this time, the Iranian government remained on the US side until the 1979 Revolution of Iran. In February 1948, Czechoslovakia, which had a parliamentary democracy, underwent a coup organized by the Soviet-backed Communist Party. In Western Europe, this event leads to fear that Soviet influence will expand further to the west. On May 14, 1948, British rule over Palestine ended, and Israel declared independence, which led to the invasion of the Arab countries in the same year. As a result of this war, the Palestinians were expelled from Israel and the Jews from the Arab countries. In the end, Israel defeated the Arabs. In occupied Germany, the United States, Britain and France united the parts under their control and formed the Federal Republic of Germany, which became known as West Germany. Following that, the western part of Berlin came under the control of West Germany. On October 7, 1949, the Soviet Union established a communist state under its rule, which led to the formation of the Democratic Republic of Germany or East Germany, and as a result, the eastern part of Berlin, which was under Soviet influence, came under East Germany. With the domination of the communists in East Germany, the economic and social conditions deteriorated and the people were dissatisfied. These dissidents, especially in the city of East Berlin, adopted the lifestyle of the people of West Berlin for a better life, and the migration of manpower to West Germany increased. With the outbreak of the Cold War, conflicts between the Soviet Union and Western governments escalated, and the border between East Germany and West Germany was eventually closed, and the Soviet Union built the Berlin Wall to cut ties between East and West Germany. Europe was divided into two blocks and separated by what is called the Iron Curtain. The Soviet Union imposes a blockade on West Berlin, which is controlled by the West Allied. An airlift was set up to bring supplies to the area. The Soviet Union controlled a large area. It was a federal government under a communist regime consisting of 15 republics and led by a single party. The United States has a liberal democratic state based on capitalism. It had a military advantage, at which time only power had nuclear weapons, and also had the world's strongest industry and economy. Both powers were trying to increase their influence in Europe. In Europe, the United States, based on the Marshall Plan, offers significant loans to European countries to revive the economy and establish trade ties with them. The Soviet Union, in turn, wants to protect its borders and create pro-Soviet governments in the liberated countries. In the United States, the proponents of communism are strongly opposed. Even Hollywood is used as a tool to produce anti-communist propaganda. In the Soviet Union, any form of opposition to the government is suppressed. Beyond ideology and influence, the two powers compete for influence in the scientific, industrial, space, sports, and military fields. Britain is secretly starting negotiations with the United States and Canada to form a joint defense alliance. That the Western Bloc will be under the umbrella of U.S. nuclear support. On April 4, 1949, in Washington, 12 countries signed the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO, also known as the Washington Treaty. The Soviet Union invests heavily in industry and weapons, and on August 29, 1949, it tested its first atomic bomb. During the Cold War, there were many indirect confrontations between the two powers and their allies. The first took place in Greece, where a rebel communist militia from the Second World War, with Soviet support and armed with Yugoslavia, enters into a civil war against the traditional monarchist party, which was supported and funded by Britain and then the United States. However, following tensions, the USSR breaks its alliance with Yugoslavia. As a result, Greek communists lose vital support and are forced to lay down their arms. Greece then becomes part of the Western Bloc. In China, after 3 years of civil war, the communists prevail over the nationalists who retreat to Taiwan. This happened in the region in favor of the Communist Soviet, which specifically affects the two wars. The first was fighting alongside Communist North Korea against South Korea, which was supported by a United Nations international force led by the United States. This war was the result of the division of Korea after World War II. It was a colony of the Japanese Empire from 1905 until the end of World War II. With the defeat of Japan in World War II, American forces entered the southern part of the Korean peninsula and Soviet forces entered its northern part, and the line known as the 38-degree parallel was designated as the border between the two sides. Efforts to hold a free election across the Korean peninsula were unsuccessful, escalating tensions between the two sides. A U.S. allied government came to power in the southern part and a communist government allied with USSR came to power in the northern part, both claiming to rule the entire Korean peninsula and never recognized the other side. The Korean War began on June 25, 1950, with the invasion of South Korea under the command of North Korean leader Kim Il-sung, crossing the 38-degree parallel, with Soviet support. In response, an international force, under the command of the United States, launched a counterattack. The United States became heavily involved in this front, and feared that the Soviets would use this situation to carry out a similar attack against West Germany. After 3 years of war, the ceasefire split the Korean peninsula into two parts. After the end of the war, the Organization of Neutral States, consisting of Swiss peacekeepers and several other neutral countries in the Korean War, was established on South Korea to monitor the ceasefire. The United States also established several military bases on South Korea to maintain its position after the war. The Soviet Union also established military equipment as well as a nuclear base in North Korea to strengthen North Korea. China also intervenes in the French Indochina region, where it supports a rebellious communist militia against France, which is forced to leave the region after trying to regain control of its former colony. Vietnam was divided into two parts, with communists in the north and nationalists in the south, backed by the United States. This is the beginning of the Vietnam War. In 1955, in response to the NATO treaty, the Soviet Union organized its military alliance with the Eastern Bloc countries called the Warsaw Pact. The following year, after the nationalization of the Suez Canal by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, France and Britain allied with Israel in a surprise war against Egypt to regain control of the Suez Canal. The Soviets then threatened to nuclear attack on Britain and France. Later, under pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union, a ceasefire was quickly imposed. The Soviet Union, which is now engaged in military and industrial technology, has installed hundreds of long-range missiles toward Western Europe. In response, the United States aims its missiles at Soviet territories. Following disagreements, China breaks its alliance with the USSR, as it intends to become a new world power. On the other hand, many countries break with the two main camps and choose to remain neutral by creating the non-aligned movement. In Latin America, the United States plays its part to ensure no room for communism. But the country fails to militarily overthrow the new communist government in Cuba. The USSR takes advantage of the American failure to diplomatically influence Cuba. Soldiers and Soviet military ships are sent to the island and missiles are installed and pointed at the United States. Tensions build to a point where the marine forces of both sides get ready to face off against each other. The whole world holds its breath and many countries prepare for an eventual World War III. But after negotiations, the USSR agrees to withdraw and remove its military facilities if in return the US promises not to attack Cuba and removes its missiles in Europe. This de-escalates the situation. In Vietnam, the United States, fearing a communist takeover of the South, organizes a military invasion with more than 500,000 soldiers. The decision antagonizes France, which prefers to find a peaceful solution. France decides to distance itself from the increasingly assertive United States and leaves NATO. In 1975, communists win the war, inflicting a heavy defeat for the United States, whose image is tarnished globally. The USSR took this opportunity to revive its political influence in the world. On the one hand, it supports communist militias in Africa which takes over power in newly independent countries. In 1979, with the revolution in Iran, the Pahlavi monarchy was overthrown and power fell into the hands of the anti-American Islamists. On the other hand, the Soviet Union sends its army to Afghanistan to support the communist regime that fights the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen were a group of Islamists funded by the United States. The USSR also upgrades and replaces its missiles directed towards Europe with more precise ones. This marks the beginning of the Euromissile crisis, which threatens Europe and pushes the United States to install new missiles of its own. This sparks an arms race, with the USSR investing up to 14% of its gross national product on the cause. On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred. It took place at the No. 4 nuclear reactor of the Chernobyl power plant near the city of Pripyat in Soviet Ukraine. The Chernobyl explosion was the main cause of the fall of the Soviet Union, said Mikhail Gorbachev, the last Soviet leader. The Chernobyl explosion was a turning point that paved the way for more freedom of expression, so much so that the system we knew could no longer survive. The Soviet Union begins to run out of money. At the height of the crisis, it tries to implement economic reforms but to no avail. Mikhail Gorbachev began reforming glasnost, meaning open space, in 1985 and perestroika, meaning reconstruction, in 1987. The United States and the Soviet Union are eventually agreed to start disarmament negotiations. The Soviet Union leaves Afghanistan and stops financial aid to communist militias in Africa. At this time, efforts to achieve more independence in Eastern European countries intensified, and Gorbachev opposed the continued military support for the governments of these countries. Following Gorbachev's decision, there were many revolutions in the Eastern Bloc took place in 1989, which resulted in the overthrow of communist governments. At this time, the Berlin Wall was destroyed and Germany reunited. The Soviet Communist Party itself lost control of the situation in the country and was banned in the Soviet Union following a failed coup in August 1991. In December 1991, following the declaration of independence of the republics of the Soviet Union, the country was officially dissolved and 15 republics became independent, marking the end of the Cold War. Many communist governments also disappeared in Africa and Asia, making the United States the only surviving superpower in the world and the winner of the Cold War. There is a great legacy of the Cold War and the events surrounding it. In popular culture, the Cold War is referred to as its important topics such as espionage and the threat of nuclear war. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe my channel and follow my Instagram page, may.ald.